You're sitting across from someone right now, maybe at work, maybe at home, maybe it's someone you love, and they're looking at you the same way they always do. But something's different. Something has shifted in the air between you. They hesitate before they speak. They choose their words more carefully. They don't challenge you the way they used to. And you haven't raised your voice. You haven't made threats. You haven't done anything overtly aggressive. So what changed? Your psychology changed. And they can feel it. They can sense something in you that wasn't there before. Something that makes their instincts whisper a warning they can't quite articulate. This isn't about becoming cruel. This isn't about manipulation or harm. This is about understanding a truth that most people will never grasp. There's a specific psychological signature that exists in certain minds. A darkness that isn't evil but calculated. A presence that doesn't seek attention but commands it anyway. And when you develop this signature, the world responds to you differently. People who would normally test your boundaries don't. People who would normally dismiss you listen. People who would normally take advantage think twice. Your mind is not entirely your own right now. It's been shaped by a lifetime of conditioning that taught you to be palatable, acceptable, non-threatening. And that conditioning has made you vulnerable. But what if you could rewrite that programming? What if you could build a psychology so dark, so precisely calibrated, that others instinctively recognize something in you they don't want to provoke? I've spent years studying the minds of people who command rooms without saying a word. Forensic psychologists, interrogators, criminal profilers, and yes, certain criminals themselves who understood psychological dominance better than most therapists. And there's a pattern, a specific architecture of thought that these individuals share. It's not aggression. Aggressive people are predictable, emotional, easy to manipulate. This is something colder, more deliberate, and it's something you can cultivate. This is happening to you right now. Someone in your life is testing you, pushing boundaries, taking small liberties, and they're doing it because your psychological presence permits it. Your energy says, I'm safe to disrespect. Your reactions say, I'm easy to manipulate. And until you understand how to reconstruct your internal architecture, this will continue. Let me tell you about Marcus. He was a mid-level manager at a tech company, competent, hardworking, well-liked, and completely invisible. His ideas were stolen in meetings. His direct reports ignored his emails. His boss spoke over him, and Marcus was angry about it. But his anger was impotent, loud, defensive. It made people uncomfortable in ways that diminished him further. Then something changed. Marcus spent 6 months doing something unusual. He stopped reacting. Completely. When someone interrupted him in a meeting, he didn't get flustered. He simply stopped talking and waited, and the silence became oppressive. When his boss criticized him unfairly, he didn't defend himself. He looked directly at his boss, unblinking, and said 3 words. Is that all? His voice was flat. No emotion, no anger, just cold acknowledgement. Within 3 months, people stopped interrupting Marcus. His boss became uncomfortable around him. His direct reports started responding to emails within hours instead of days. Marcus hadn't become mean. He hadn't become aggressive. He had become unreadable. And unreadable people are dangerous people because we fear what we cannot predict. This is what I'm going to teach you. How to become psychologically unreadable. How to develop a presence that makes others hesitate before they test you. How to build a mind so dark, so controlled, that people instinctively recognize you're not someone to trifle with. And we're going to do this ethically. Because true psychological darkness isn't about harming others. It's about protecting yourself with such precision that harm becomes unnecessary. The first element of a dark psychology is emotional opacity. Most people are emotional billboards. Their faces betray every thought. Their voices crack under pressure. Their body language screams their insecurities. And predators, manipulators, and opportunists read these signals like children's books. They know exactly which buttons to push, exactly how to destabilize you, exactly when you're vulnerable. Emotional opacity is the art of showing nothing, not suppressing emotion. That's different. Suppression is visible. It's tension. It's effort. Opacity is the complete absence of readable signals. Your face remains neutral. Your voice stays level. Your body language reveals nothing. And this creates profound psychological discomfort in others because humans are pattern recognition machines. We constantly scan for emotional data to predict behavior. When we can't find that data, our threat assessment systems activate. We become cautious, uncertain, and that uncertainty translates to respect. Think about the last person who made you genuinely nervous. Not scared. Nervous. There's a difference. Fear is about immediate threat. Nervousness is about unpredictability. You felt nervous because you couldn't read them. You didn't know how they'd react. You couldn't predict their next move. That's power. Real power. And it comes from emotional opacity. Your mind is not entirely your own. Right now, your emotional reactions are being triggered by others constantly. Your coworker knows that a certain tone of voice will make you defensive. Your partner knows that bringing up a specific topic will make you anxious. Your family knows exactly which guilt trip will make you comply. They've mapped your emotional landscape, and they navigate it with ease. Emotional opacity erases that map. It forces others to proceed with caution because the terrain is no longer familiar. Let me tell you about Rachel. She worked in a law firm where office politics were vicious. Backstabbing was routine. Credit theft was common. And Rachel was tired of being a target. She was emotional, reactive. When someone undermined her, she'd confront them, voice raised, frustration visible. And it made her look weak, made her look unstable. So she changed tactics. The next time a colleague took credit for her work in a meeting, Rachel didn't react. She simply turned her head slowly, looked at the colleague, and smiled. Not a warm smile, not an angry smile, just a smile, slight, knowing. And then she turned back to her notes. The room went silent. The colleague stammered through the rest of their presentation. And after the meeting, that colleague avoided Rachel completely because that smile communicated something terrifying. It said, I see what you did. I'm not reacting now, but I'm remembering. And you don't know what I'm going to do with this information. That's psychological darkness. Not revenge, not aggression, just calculated opacity that makes others question whether they've made a very dangerous enemy. The second element is strategic silence. Most people feel silence because silence makes them uncomfortable. They explain, they justify, they overshare, and every word is information about their fears, their insecurities, their intentions. Strategic silence is about weaponizing the absence of words. When someone asks you a probing question, you don't have to answer immediately. You can pause, look at them, let the silence stretch, and watch them become uncomfortable. Watch them start to feel the silence themselves. Watch them reveal more than they intended. When someone accuses you of something, you don't have to defend yourself right away. You can simply let the accusation hang in the air. Let them stew in it. Let them wonder why you're not reacting. And that wondering is more powerful than any defense you could mount. I watched an interrogator break a suspect once. Not with questions, with silence. The suspect was experienced, street smart. He knew not to talk. So the interrogator sat across from him and said nothing for 45 minutes. Just sat there, hands folded, eyes steady, and the silence became unbearable. The suspect started talking just to fill the void, started explaining himself, started making mistakes. By the end, he confessed to things he wasn't even being questioned about. That's the power of strategic silence. It creates a psychological vacuum that people desperately want to fill, and in filling it, they expose themselves. Your mind is not entirely your own. You've been conditioned to believe that silence is awkward, that you need to smooth over uncomfortable moments, that you should explain yourself when questioned. But that conditioning serves others, not you. Strategic silence reverses the power dynamic. It makes others work to understand you, makes them uncertain about where they stand, makes them reveal their hand while you keep yours hidden. Think about someone in your life who never explains themselves, who doesn't justify their decisions. who simply states what they're going to do and then does it. How do you feel around that person? Probably cautious, probably respectful, because you don't fully understand their reasoning. You don't know their limits. You don't know what would happen if you push them. That's what strategic silence creates, a psychological moat that others are afraid to cross. The third element is delayed response. Most people react immediately. Someone insults them, they fire back. Someone challenges them, they defend. Someone makes a demand. They either comply or refuse in the moment. Immediate response is predictable, and predictability is weakness. Delayed response is about inserting time between stimulus and reaction. When someone says something designed to provoke you, you don't react. You simply note it, file it away, and continue as if nothing happened. Hours later, maybe days later, you address it, but on your terms, in your timing, with careful calculation. This is psychologically devastating to manipulators, because manipulators rely on immediate emotional reactions. They say something hurtful to watch you hurt. They make an accusation to watch you scramble to defend yourself. They push a boundary to see if you'll enforce it right away. When you don't give them that immediate reaction, they lose their leverage. They lose confirmation that their tactics work, and they become uncertain about whether to continue. Let me tell you about David. He had a business partner who would regularly undermine him in front of clients, make little jokes at his expense, subtle digs designed to diminish his authority. And for years, David would get flustered, would try to laugh it off, would attempt to redirect the conversation. His immediate reactions confirmed to his partner that the tactics were effective, so they continued. Then David implemented delayed response. The next time his partner made a joke at his expense during a client meeting, David simply looked at him briefly, no expression, then continued his presentation as if nothing had happened. The joke landed flat. The room felt awkward, but David didn't acknowledge it. 3 days later, David walked into his partner's office, closed the door, and said calmly, "If you undermine me in front of client again, I'll dissolve the partnership. I'm not discussing this. I'm telling you." Then he left. No argument. No negotiation, just a clear boundary enforced on David's timeline. His partner never made another joke, because David had demonstrated something crucial. He doesn't react in the moment. He processes, he calculates, and when he responds, it's final. That's terrifying to people who rely on emotional manipulation, because they can't see the response coming, can't predict when or how you'll address their behavior, can't calibrate their tactics in real time. Your mind is not entirely your own. Right now, people are training you to react immediately, to be emotional, to be predictable, because predictable people are controllable people. Delayed response breaks that control. It says, I operate on my timeline, not yours, and you don't know when I'm coming. Stop. Listen to your gut right now. Who in your life relies on your immediate reactions? Who says things designed to make you respond emotionally? Who gets uncomfortable when you don't engage right away? Those are the people who need you predictable. Those are the people who will respect you more when you become opaque. The fourth element is comfortable aggression. Most people are either passive or reactive. Passive people avoid conflict entirely. They people please. They capitulate. They hope problems will resolve themselves. Reactive people respond to aggression with aggression. They match energy. They escalate. They lose control. Both are weak positions. Comfortable aggression is different. It's the ability to be directly, calmly confrontational without emotional escalation. It's looking someone in the eye and saying no with no explanation, no apology, no softening language. Just no. It's addressing boundary violations immediately and dispassionately. Don't do that again. Not, I'd really appreciate if you wouldn't. Not, that kind of bothered me when. Just clear, unemotional correction. It's being willing to let relationships end rather than tolerate disrespect. Not threatening to end them. Not dramatically announcing your departure. Just quietly withdrawing without explanation when someone demonstrates they don't value you appropriately. I studied a hostage negotiator once. She told me something that changed how I understood psychological power. She said, the moment you're afraid of someone leaving, they own you. The moment you're genuinely comfortable walking away, you own yourself. Comfortable aggression is about cultivating that genuine comfort with negative outcomes. Most people are terrified of conflict, terrified of being disliked, terrified of losing relationships, and that terror makes them tolerate unacceptable behavior. They let people cross lines. They accept disrespect. They compromise their boundaries because the alternative, confrontation or loss, feels too threatening. People with dark psychology don't have that terror, not because they don't value relationships, but because they value themselves more. They'd rather be alone than disrespected. They'd rather be disliked than controlled. And that willingness, that genuine comfort with negative outcomes, radiates from them like a force field. Others sense it, and they don't test it. Let me tell you about Jennifer. She was in a relationship with someone who used guilt to control her. Every time she wanted to spend time with friends, he'd make comments about feeling abandoned. Every time she pursued her own interests, he'd sulk. And for 2 years, Jennifer adjusted her behavior to manage his emotions. She canceled plans. She gave up hobbies. She made herself smaller to keep him comfortable. Then something shifted. Jennifer decided she was comfortable with the relationship ending. Not that she wanted it to end, but she accepted it as a possible outcome. And that acceptance changed everything. The next time he tried the guilt routine, she said calmly, "I'm going out with my friends tonight. You're welcome to process your feelings about that however you need to." No apology, no negotiation, just a statement of fact. He escalated, said maybe they shouldn't be together if she was going to be selfish. And Jennifer said, maybe we shouldn't, and walked out. He called 3 hours later, apologetic, promising to change, because Jennifer had demonstrated something he'd never encountered from her before. She was comfortable with loss. She wasn't afraid of his emotional manipulation. She'd rather be alone than controlled. That's comfortable aggression. And it's magnetic. Within 6 months, their dynamic had completely transformed. Not because she became mean, but because she became immovable. Your mind is not entirely your own. You've been taught that aggression is wrong, that directness is rude, that you should soften your boundaries with apologetic language, but that teaching serves people who want to control you. Comfortable aggression is about reclaiming your right to take up space, to enforce your boundaries without guilt, to be willing to lose what doesn't serve you. And when you cultivate that comfort, people sense it. They feel that you're not someone who can be pushed, not someone who will tolerate disrespect for fear of consequences, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. The fifth element is predictive reading. Most people are reactive to behavior. Someone treats them poorly, they respond. Someone lies to them, they confront. Someone violates a boundary, they address it, but they're always one step behind, responding to what already happened. People with dark psychology are predictive. They read patterns. They notice microsignals. They see manipulation coming before it fully manifests, and they address it preemptively. This is about developing a sixth sense for human behavior, noticing when someone's tone shifts slightly, when their stories don't quite align, when they're testing a boundary so subtly that most people wouldn't consciously register it. And instead of waiting for the behavior to escalate, you address the pattern, not aggressively, just with awareness. "I've noticed you do this thing. I'm letting you know I see it." That statement alone is often enough to stop the behavior, because manipulators rely on operating beneath conscious awareness. The moment you demonstrate that you see their tactics clearly, those tactics lose power. I watched a forensic psychologist interview a suspect once. The suspect was skilled, charming, gave consistent answers, never contradicted himself. But the psychologist noticed something. Every time she asked about a specific time frame, the suspect would briefly touch his neck, just a quick gesture, barely noticeable, and she called it out. She said calmly, "You touch your neck every time I ask about Tuesday evening. Why is that?" The suspect froze, because he thought he was unreadable, thought his self-soothing gesture was invisible. And the moment he realized she was tracking patterns he didn't know he was displaying, his entire strategy collapsed. That's predictive reading. Not waiting for the lie, not waiting for the manipulation, seeing the pattern, and naming it before it fully develops. Think about the people in your life right now. Are there patterns you've been ignoring? Does someone always play victim right after they hurt you? Does someone always bring up your past mistakes when you set a boundary? Does someone always have a crisis when you're about to do something for yourself? These aren't coincidences. These are tactics. And the moment you start seeing them as patterns rather than isolated incidents, you gain power. Because you stop being reactive, you become predictive. You see the manipulation coming, and you can choose whether to engage with it at all. Your mind is not entirely your own. You've been trained to give people the benefit of the doubt, to assume positive intent, to ignore patterns in favor of individual explanations. But that training makes you vulnerable to people who understand patterns and use them intentionally. Let me tell you about Michael. He had a colleague who was systematically undermining him, but it was subtle. A skeptical expression during his presentations, a pause before agreeing with his ideas, small comments that planted doubt without being overtly critical. For months, Michael couldn't articulate what was happening. It felt wrong, but he couldn't name it. Then he started tracking the pattern. Every time Michael proposed something, this colleague would say some variation of, "That's interesting, but have we considered?" and then propose a slightly different version. Every time, without fail, once Michael saw the pattern, he addressed it directly. In a meeting, after the colleague did again, Michael said calmly, "This is the 7th time you reframed my proposals as incomplete and then presented nearly identical ideas as your own. I need you to either support my ideas or oppose them clearly, but stop repositioning them as if they're new thoughts." The room went silent. The colleague stammered, and the behavior stopped. Because Michael had named the pattern, had demonstrated he was tracking it, had shown he was no longer unconscious of the tactic. That's the power of predictive reading. It forces manipulators into the light. The 6th element is control volatility. This is the most misunderstood element of dark psychology. Most people think psychological power comes from being consistently calm, unshakable, never showing emotion. But that's not quite right. Predictable calm is just another form of predictability. True psychological power comes from control volatility, the ability to be mostly calm, mostly measured, but occasionally strategically unpredictable, not losing control, but appearing as though you might. Most people operate within narrow emotional bandwidths. They're consistently anxious or consistently passive or consistently angry, and that consistency allows others to calibrate their approach. They know exactly how you'll react, exactly how far they can push, exactly what behavior to expect. Controlled volatility disrupts that calibration. It's being calm 95% of the time, but having moments where your response is disproportionate in ways that make others uncertain whether you're actually in control or not. This isn't about actually losing control. It's about strategic performance. It's about occasionally responding to a minor infraction with such focused intensity that people wonder what would happen if they committed a major one. I knew a principal at a high school who understood this perfectly. 99% of the time, he was calm, approachable. Students felt comfortable around him, but once, maybe twice a year, he would respond to a relatively minor infraction with immediate, intense consequences. Not yelling, not anger, but cold, swift action. A student would leave trash on a table, and he'd personally escort them back to clean it. Stand there, watch them, not say a word, just presence, intense, unwavering presence. And the story would spread through the school. Students never knew which infractions he let slide and which ones would trigger that response. So they erred on the side of caution. Always. That's control volatility. It creates a psychological uncertainty that makes people hesitate before testing you, because they can't predict which version of you they'll encounter. Your mind is not entirely your own. You've been taught that consistency is virtuous, that you should always be the same person, always react proportionately, always be reasonable. But that consistency makes you predictable, and predictable people get tested constantly. Control volatility introduces doubt. It makes people wonder, is this the time they'll actually react strongly? And that wondering is enough to change behavior. Stop. Think about this right now. Who in your life never worries about how you'll react? Who pushes boundaries without hesitation? Who treats you with casual disrespect? Those are the people who've calibrated you perfectly, who know exactly how you'll respond, who determine you're safe to test. Control volatility breaks that safety, not with genuine loss of control, but with strategic unpredictability that makes them recalculate the risk. The seventh element is consequence execution. Most people make threats they don't enforce. They draw boundaries they don't defend. They announce consequences they don't implement. And every empty threat, every unenforced boundary, every consequence that never materializes teaches others that your words mean nothing, that they can violate your stated limits without real repercussions. People with dark psychology don't make threats. They don't announce consequences. They simply execute them. No warning, no drama, no explanation. You violate a boundary, and suddenly the relationship dynamic has changed. Access is restricted. Privileges are removed. Engagement is withdrawn. And it happens quietly, definitively, without negotiation. This is terrifying to people who are used to multiple chances, used to forgiveness without accountability, used to violating boundaries and then smooth talking their way back into good graces. Because consequence execution doesn't leave room for manipulation. There's no argument to win, no forgiveness to negotiate, just a cold reality that actions have immediate, non-negotiable consequences. Let me tell you about Thomas. He had a friend who was chronically unreliable, would commit to plans and cancel last minute, would borrow things and return them damaged or not at all, would ask for favors constantly, but be unavailable when Thomas needed help. And Thomas would get frustrated, would have conversations about it, would extract promises to do better, and the cycle would continue, because there were never consequences, just conversations. Then Thomas implemented consequence execution. The next time this friend canceled plans last minute, Thomas didn't get angry, didn't lecture, just stopped inviting him to things. Completely, the friend reached out weeks later, confused about why he was being excluded. Thomas said simply, "You're not reliable, so I don't include you in plans anymore." The friend protested, promised to change, asked for another chance. Thomas said, "Maybe in the future, not now," and ended the conversation. No anger, no debate, just consequence. Within 3 months, the friend had completely changed his behavior, started showing up, started being reliable, because he'd learned that Thomas's boundaries weren't suggestions. They were conditions of access, and violations resulted in immediate, quiet removal of that access. Your mind is not entirely your own. You've been taught that forgiveness is unconditional, that you should give people multiple chances, that enforcing consequences makes you rigid or cruel, but that teaching serves people who want to violate your boundaries without losing your presence in their life. Consequence execution is about respecting yourself enough to make your words mean something, to let your boundaries have teeth, to demonstrate that access to you is a privilege that can be revoked. And when people sense that you actually will withdraw, that you actually will enforce consequences without hesitation, they stop testing you, because the risk is real. The eighth element is status indifference. Most people are constantly monitoring their social position, seeking approval, seeking validation, seeking confirmation that they're valued, respected, liked, and that seeking creates vulnerability, because anyone who controls validation controls them. People with dark psychology are genuinely indifferent to status, not pretending indifference. Actually indifferent. They don't need your approval, don't need your validation, don't need confirmation of their worth from external sources. And that indifference is magnetic, because we're drawn to people who don't need us. We respect people who don't seek our respect. We value people who are comfortable without our validation. This isn't about arrogance. Arrogant people are actually desperate for validation. They're constantly trying to prove their worth, which reveals how uncertain they are of it. Status indifference is quiet. It's being genuinely comfortable operating alone, genuinely comfortable being misunderstood, genuinely comfortable letting others think whatever they want without correcting them. I studied a CEO once who embodied this completely. During a board meeting, one of the investors questioned his strategy aggressively, implied he didn't know what he was doing, suggested the company needed different leadership, and this CEO didn't defend himself, didn't get flustered, just looked at the investor and said, "You're welcome to vote me out if you'd like. I'm comfortable with that outcome." And meant it. The investor backed down immediately because the CEO had demonstrated something rare. He genuinely didn't need the position, wasn't attached to the status, would rather walk away than convince someone of his value. That's status indifference. And it's powerful because it eliminates leverage. You can't control someone who doesn't need what you're offering. Think about the last time you adjusted your behavior to gain someone's approval, change your opinion to fit in, soften your boundaries to be liked, tolerated disrespect to maintain a relationship. Every time you do that, you're announcing that status matters to you, that approval matters to you, that you're controllable through validation and rejection. Status indifference eliminates that control. It says, think what you want, like me, or don't. I'm the same either way. Your mind is not entirely your own. You've been trained to seek external validation, to measure your worth by others' opinions, to be devastated by rejection and elated by approval. But that training makes you manipulable by anyone willing to withhold or grant validation strategically. Let me tell you about Sarah. She worked in an environment where social dynamics were everything. Who had lunch with whom? Who was invited to which meetings? Who had access to senior leadership? And Sarah spent years playing that game, networking, positioning, seeking inclusion, and it made her anxious, constantly monitoring her social standing, constantly worried about being excluded. Then something shifted. Sarah decided she didn't care, not rebelliously, not as a defensive posture. She genuinely stopped caring whether she was included, started eating lunch alone by choice, stopped attending optional social events, stopped seeking FaceTime with executives. And something strange happened. People started seeking her out, started wanting to include her, started valuing her presence more than when she was pursuing theirs, because she'd stopped needing them. And people always value most what they can't control. The ninth element is narrative control. Most people let others define the story of who they are. Someone accuses them of something. They defend against that accusation, which means they're arguing within a frame someone else created. Someone defines their behavior in negative terms. They try to reframe it, which still keeps them inside the other person's narrative. People with dark psychology control the narrative. They don't defend against accusations. They redefine the terms. They don't argue within frames others create. They establish their own frame and force others to argue within it. This is about linguistic dominance, about being the person who defines terms, sets context, and establishes the interpretation of events. When someone accuses you of being difficult, you don't defend yourself by arguing you're not difficult. You reframe entirely. I'm precise. If that's difficult for you, that's information about your standards, not mine. When someone criticizes your approach, you don't justify your approach. You question their criteria. What standard are you using to evaluate this? Because by professional standards, it's exactly right. I watched a defense attorney do this brilliantly during a trial. The prosecutor was trying to establish that his client's behavior was suspicious. The attorney didn't argue the behavior wasn't suspicious. He reframed the entire conversation. He said, suspicion is what we feel when we don't understand something. The prosecution has demonstrated they don't understand my client's behavior. That's not evidence of guilt. That's evidence of investigative gaps. He'd taken their frame, this behavior is suspicious, and rebuilt it into you're confused. That's narrative control, not arguing within someone else's story. Creating your own story and making them respond to it. Your mind is not entirely your own. Right now, there are narratives about you that you didn't create, definitions of who you are that others have written. And every time you defend yourself without reframing, you reinforce those narratives. Narrative control is about refusing to accept other stories about you, about being the author of your own definition. And when you consistently do this, people stop trying to define you because they learn their definitions won't stick. You're awake now. That's what makes you dangerous. Not to innocent people, not to people who respect boundaries and treat others with basic dignity. You're dangerous to manipulators, to people who rely on others being unconscious, to people who need you predictable and controllable, because you're not anymore. You've seen the architecture of dark psychology, emotional opacity that makes you unreadable, strategic silence that makes others uncomfortable, delayed response that makes you unpredictable, comfortable aggression that demonstrates you're not afraid of loss, predictive reading that lets you see manipulation coming, control volatility that introduces doubt, consequence execution that makes your boundaries real, status indifference that eliminates leverage against you, narrative control that refuses others' definitions. These aren't manipulation tactics. These are psychological defense systems, armor against people who would use your predictability against you. And when you cultivate these elements, you build a psychology so dark, so precisely calibrated, that others hesitate around you, not because you're cruel, but because you're controlled, not because you're aggressive, but because you're movable, not because you're manipulative, but because you're immune to manipulation. So ask yourself right now, who in your life needs you predictable? Who needs you emotional? Who needs you seeking their approval? Those are the people who will be uncomfortable with this new version of you, who will accuse you of changing, who will say you're not yourself anymore. And they're right. You're not. You're someone they can't control. And they hate that, but the people who matter, the people who respect you, will respond differently. They'll give you more space, more respect, more consideration, because they'll sense that you're not someone to test, not someone to take for granted, not someone who tolerates disrespect for fear of consequences. Your mind is yours now. Reclaim it. Build it dark. Build it calculated. Build it so precisely controlled that others instinctively recognize you're not prey anymore. You're something else entirely. And that something makes them hesitate, makes them think twice, makes them treat you the way you should have been treated all along. The question isn't whether you should do this. The question is why you waited so long. So, who's pulling your strings right now? And when are you going to cut them?